Okie dokie, everybody. Welcome back into the We Shall Not Sleep podcast. Thank you so much for joining us once again this week. It's been an amazing journey so far, and I'm so humbled by it. The fact that this is a collective journey just always reminds me that I couldn't do this by myself. And this isn't about me or what I have to offer, it's about the guests, it's about what the Holy Spirit is doing. So thank you so much for spreading that around. This is a small community, and it's worth it. It's 100% worth it. So thank you for everything that you have done, and please continue to leave comments, feedback, and if you have any suggestions about future topics or guests, please feel free to drop an email at wsnspodcast@gmail.com. Alrighty, so the guest this week, somebody who's certainly played an important role in my life. I call him my hero for a reason. Many people, they certainly can't relate to him, not because of his passion for the church and for his particular set of skills, which he'll talk about, but his certain calling. It's a road less traveled, and this individual has had to do a lot of convincing and showing people that the world of safety and security is a value. It's not just a priority. And how do we make that a value in our churches? So, from a career that has spanned 25 years of firefighting, police work, medical examiner's office, floor nursing, safety plant coordinator, to now director of campus safety at Spring Arbor University, this individual, along with their academic experience, has a wealth of information to share. Many people call him friend. A lot of people call him mentor or teacher. Some call him brother. One person calls him husband, but only I can call him my father. Please welcome in Scott Krebill. Dad, what's going on? Thanks for joining me this week, and how are you doing this evening?
Hey, doing really good.
Yeah.
It's great to be here, be with you, and go through this discussion.
Yeah, I think it's an important one. I'm glad that you're able to set aside some of your time that we can discuss some things that I think that you're passionate about. And, honestly, I know this might go to your head or something, but you were a highly requested guest amongst my friends and other family members. So when I have to at least tell them about this ahead of time that you were here tonight. So anyway, I don't want to pump you up with a lot of pride, but you're a very hotly sought after guest.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you got it, But
That's right.
I think it's interesting the difference in our generations and some of the things that we talk about, and looking at the issues in today and some of our values that we have. Seems to be a broader separation in the generations now than maybe what there was before.
And you're just talking about like interests and what we actually like to talk
Well,
about.
I think it's with the culture and just what society's demanding. From a practical standpoint, um, I think technology um, basically is solving all your problems, and you don't really have to think about it. So I'm just seeing there's a bigger and bigger gap from the independent person to the dependent person.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that at least podcasts, depending on which one you're listening to, can offer a little bit of insight, maybe some wisdom into those people that you're talking about. So
Right.
it provides a good platform. As I had with many guests on here, and I know the story, but other people won't. I've asked you many times over the years. As you're my dad, I love you to death. You've sacrificed so much for our family, but one of the things that I want everyone to at least talk about when I have them on here is how did you come to Christ? How did you even get into the church? Because I know you weren't raised necessarily in the church. It was because of outside influence. So can you describe briefly for those who don't know you, like what was your journey to Christ like?
Well, I think it goes way back to even when I was real little. It seemed that, um, we were always raised with the idea that God existed, that there was a God. And that was based on just, the times. I mean, I was born in 1963, and so when you went to school, we still prayed. I was involved in the Boy Scouts, and so we still prayed, and we still did things for, it was God, country, fellow man. And then I did have exposures to church, a couple of different churches that I went to when I was in grade school. So the concept of God outside of Easter and Christmas was still a part, even though we were probably like a secular family. And then it was still, the values of being polite and kind to one another. It just seemed to be that moral compass was always kind of like similar. I thought about one time uh, there was a cartoon, it was a claymation that was put on by the Lutheran Church called Davey and Goliath. And I used to watch it all the time, and I had no idea that it was actually a Christian or a church-based cartoon. It was just Davy and Goliath about a boy named Davy and his dog named Goliath, and the dog, talked, and it was
Right.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it seemed like always at the end, it was always this lesson that they talked about, and then they always talked about God. It was like it was never really funny, but there was always, of course, Davy was always getting into a problem, and he was always, there was always this big moral dilemma that he was trying to figure out in life. So, again, it was just all that subtle exposure. So God was not foreign. However, because of some significant things that happened in my life with my father leaving, and life got really tough.
Hmm.
And so the stresses of life, and basically just came to a point where I realized that I just couldn't do this by myself. I just got to the point where the demands of trying to help my mom with the house and getting into that age where you just felt like you just can't do this.
Hmm.
And so I
Yeah.
was, I was invited to church, and I was 14 when I just answered the call. The Holy Spirit really moved in my life, and I would say that I probably had one of them Damascus experiences because it was very emotional. It was, deep, a deep thought process. It was a critical decision. It was like the light switch came on, and it was a life changing decision. My whole lifestyle up to
Hmm.
that point, was probably going down a different path. But that day, I was on a Sunday. I remember that day at Central Wesleyan Church when there was an altar call, and I went forward, and I asked Christ into my life. And from that point on, my life always changed. A couple of years later, I was baptized on a canoe trip with our youth group in the Pierre Marquette River, and so just went from there and heavily involved in a youth group and became a youth leader and Sunday school. And just basically the church kind of like raised me after that. Um, just socially being involved in a lot of different activities, and that kept me out of the wrong groups. That kept me out of the influence of drugs and alcohol and some other stuff. So I had really good influence. So God was moving in my life and probably didn't even realize it because I had really no supervision. So growing up in the church, uh, keeping busy, not being able to be influenced by a lot of bad things, um, really was, I think, a significant part of my child development and going into my teens. Seems like I just never got in trouble because of that morality that I had of right and wrong. So
And how old were you then? Like when you, well, how old were you on that day then when you had that altar call at Central Wesleyan?
I believe I was 14 years old. Might have been 13. I think I was just going into seventh grade.
Hmm.
Right.
And what's interesting about your little testimony there is that um, your generation of people, those who are like right on the edge of like for baby boomers and Gen Xers, what's interesting is that you guys are so much intertwined with that idea of old family values, and we're not talking about the all the values that the culture held. You're talking about maybe the common, more, I would say, widespread values that families had, which I heard all the time, growing up. Specifically for me, was like this shared morality, shared ethics. When you did something, like, it's foreign. Like, yeah, I can't imagine going to like a playground as a kid growing up and being scolded by another parent because there was like this common understanding. But that was kind of like the era you grew up in. Kids seem to. I know that comedians have joked about for years. Kids seem to be quote unquote smarter, had more street smarts back in the day. Like, the survival of the fittest was much more apparent. Like, you're not gonna see yourself walking down the train tracks with headphones in and, and get hit by a train. That didn't happen. Of course, you didn't have headphones, 40 years ago. But there seems to have been a loss, at least in my opinion, from what your generation experienced as kids versus my own. And I don't know if that's technology or if it's just maybe it's being outside more. What do you understand? I guess what I'm getting
Right.
at, like,
Well, I think there's several factors. One, I think the I think the interactive part about people, human beings interacting with one another. You learn about one another. You learn about people's traits, personalities, and there's influences there. And so I can think of all of the people in our neighborhood, all the kids growing up, and you really knew their likes and dislikes, and you knew you knew you had resources. If you needed a friend to help you fix a bike, you knew which one would help you fix a bike, and you knew who couldn't fix a bike. So there's a lot of things that you had to learn and discover on your own. Like, technology today just gives you the answer. It's just the answer, but it doesn't give you the solution process. It's kind of like when you do math.
yeah,
You know, it's like you can get the right answer, but you have to show your work. How
right?
did you get there? And
Still,
I think the best way is that it was told me a few years ago was a concept or an idea called intellectual curiosity. And that's what your generation lacks. Nobody cares how things are made or where they come from or how you get from A to Z. All we care about is whether we get to Z, and everything in between doesn't matter. And that's what we have computers for. They do all the thinking. You see it in the automotive industry. You see it in you know different things where it's all self-help. An automobile back in the day didn't have a computer, and the driver was it was a driving experience. So you had to learn how to lane change, you had to learn how to back up, you had to learn how to control your speed. And so when you look at a comparison of just the automobile, if you look at what they've done with the automobile and how they've taken the human decision making process out, cruise control, you no longer have to regulate the speed yourself. Backup cameras. You no longer have to turn your head back and make a decision or a judgment. Lane changing. You don't even have to look and make a lane change because the car will give you a beep if it does it. And then they got these cars now that will park themselves because nobody even wants to learn how to parallel park anymore. So
mhm,
it's just that. I mean, I know it's just that whole concept. And from my generation, when you start seeing that, we see it as a loss.
mhm,
Um,
yeah,
so there's a skill set there. Now, if I was to say, if I was king for the day, you've heard me say this before. So if I was king for the day, I would tell every person, and I've kind of thought about this for a while. I would tell every person to learn the basic skills of life. Think about what our our basic core needs are. Food,
mhm,
okay?
yeah,
How many people don't know how to cook?
mhm,
Okay? If you don't know how to cook, how are you going to feed yourself? Well, you're going to be dependent upon somebody else or some other thing to feed you. Okay? Shelter. You should learn the basic fundamentals of how your house operates, how your heating works, how your plumbing works, how your electrical works. I'm not saying you have to be, expert. I'm saying you have to have a basic understanding to problem solve because it's your household. If your plumbing goes out in the middle of the night,
mhm,
and you're dependent upon a plumber, you can't get water or you can't get your drain fixed. You don't know how to even use Mr. Drano or something like that. Okay. Same way with a light fixture. If your light switch doesn't work because your light switch is broke or it's bad, you're gonna have to call an electrician so you can have the lights come on in your house. It's just the basic fundamentals. Automobile, transportation. You got to get to work. So you should have at least a good understanding of how your automobile works so that you can troubleshoot it. Of course, today, I mean, there's very, very few people can fix their own vehicles, but you still need to have an understanding so that you don't make the problem worse. So I just think about all that. And, there's people that, they weld and they fix things and they do things. These are skills that are no longer valued, but they're still required because we live in a physical world, and that's not going to change. And there are some things that technology has replaced for the better, I admit that, but there are other things that technology will never be able to change. So,
or replace, yeah.
yeah.
Which would be what? What would you?
Well, I mean, I think it's the human interaction, the compassion. What if we didn't have a doctor, we just had a robot, okay? And he wasn't able to understand, what a patient's going through, like what,
The
you know,
ability to empathize,
yeah,
have
empathize,
compassion
and then
for
and look at the whole.
picture, the whole
The,
picture, the whole story,
yeah,
context.
because there's a lot of background, a lot of history going on with this patient, a lot of influence about
Yeah,
what's going on in their life. So,
gotcha. Yeah, there's certainly challenges. I know that, you know because of, like, for some millennials, like, I didn't grow up with a cell phone, so I knew what to do as a kid without a cell phone. I was in that kind of sweet spot where I grew up outside. I grew up with friends, playing games, playing hide and seek,
mhm.
getting into a little bit of trouble, building a fort. But I would absolutely agree with you that to a certain point, to a certain extent, there was a point where I plateaued, where my intellectual curiosity started to wane a little bit
Mhm.
because of the the allures of what technology can do, which I think are great. Like, technology, like you said, is, I think, well, maybe what you're referring to is a tool that can be used for a lot of good. But
Right.
if it's a crutch, it's the difference between, actually getting the answer, like you said. If someone gives you the answer to that math problem, or they teach you how to do it, because
Right.
you're not really learning a whole lot. I can learn a fact. I can figure out. I can Google something, but does that mean I actually learned it?
Right.
I've learned how to get the answer, not why the answer is that way.
Right. And I think there's this concept of need and want because you just kind of sparked a memory. I remember way long time ago when I was going to Jackson Community College, and I think I took it was like an EMT class or something. It was when um, I think it was when I was still working at the police department, maybe. But anyway, this was before we had a personal computer, before personal computers were really popular. Some people had them, but we had taken a test or something in this class, and I inquired about the grade, and the professor said, "Well, it's online, or you have to check it on the computer." And I said, "Well, I don't have a computer." And he looked at me like I was from Mars. It's like, "You mean you don't have a computer?" And I remember, my sarcastic point. I said, "Well, do you have a tractor?" And he
Yeah.
said, "Well, no, I don't have a tractor." He goes, I don't need a tractor." And I said, "Well, I don't need a computer." And apparently, what he was basically saying is you don't have a computer, you may not think you need one, but eventually you're going to have one. And so I think that's what the process for my generation is, that we were able to do everything that we were doing in life without the technology. So what does the technology do other than does it make it easier, faster, simpler, but it's still basically this, you're still doing the same things in life. You're adding, subtracting, you're storing files, you're processing information, but is it actually better? I can tell you a horror story about going to the doctor where they were just transferring to go paperless. They were transferring the paper files to the computer, and it was like I was no longer a patient. I was just a number, and they didn't even have half of my stuff even transferred over. And yet, this was my medical record. So, there are times when I think we think about it from our generation about what's actually really good. And then there's this situation where why do we have to have it? Do we have to have it because it's the latest greatest fad? Is it the newest mousetrap that's out there? Or are we just doing things because, somebody's inventing it and they want to make money and they sell it? And that goes back to like would have been my grandparents about getting a telephone and getting a cordless telephone and then getting an answering machine and then a VCR and then all these. So you see these things progress. So you think, and at our age, you think about what's happened in the last 25 years with technology. Think about what's going to happen in the next 25
Yeah,
years. I
the
mean,
rate of advancement it's exponential,
right,
and that like they say like the rate of advancement just with like just microchips and how much smaller they're getting with processors, how much
right,
faster they're getting, and that's where and I have empathy. I think a lot of people with us millennials who look at our parents, like almost like half our parents' generations use technology the way it's supposed to be, and the other ones just completely reject it, and they have this kind of downtrodden look on the other generations. It's like, and it causes like division. It's like
mm,
we're raised. My generation's raised in this. The technology was built by those who came before us. So
right.
millennials didn't invent this
Oh, right,
technology.
right,
We're just using it, and we're growing up in
right,
the world. But sometimes we feel attacked for
hmm,
utilizing it.
right.
It's like intellectual curiosity. Well, if we don't have that, and it's not our fault, then what are we supposed to do about it? You can't just become intellectually curious if you've been trained for your entire life. For some of us, upwards of 30 years, you don't just wake up one day and you're like, okay, I'm going to learn how to fix my car. I mean, some people, but an entire generation, like it almost has to be taken away for some people to be forced to
Right.
learn something. It has to be unavailable to them.
I think the issue is not that the technology is bad or agreeing with what you said. I think the shift is more and more to technology and not on the problem solving or the intellectual curiosity. What I'm saying is we always we were very intellectually curious. Every kid that ever had Legos had intellectual curiosity.
Hmm.
They built things. They built things up based on the picture, your Millennium Falcon, and then you tore it
Hmm.
apart,
That's
and
right.
then you wanted to put it back together again.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
that what I'm saying is that you had that, and as you've gotten older, you'd rather do something on a screen with a 3D image now and stuff like that. So it's a progress, and what I'm saying is the fact that we still need to build bridges, we still need to build roads, we still need to do manufacturing. We have to build things because everything you wear, touch, sit on, has to be built.
Yeah.
And yeah, even though we have robots that do that, they have to be designed.
Yeah.
They have to,
People are still building the
right.
robots.
And I'm afraid that where's the creativity? So when you were in customer service, a computer and an AI is not customer service. It is not customer service because it does not understand the problem. All it's trying to do is run through an algorithm and fix the problem, that
Right.
kind of thing. And you see a lot of that now. I mean, and that's what happened with my doctor's appointment. My nurse was asking me what my prescriptions were because on the computer screen he was trying to figure out all there were was like 7 selections and he didn't know what they were. So he kept asking me. And I said sarcastically, why don't we call my doctor? Oh, yeah, that's you guys. So it's just like we got so caught up in this computer stuff that we forgot that we were actually in the point of source, the reference. And the chart had all that information in there. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't I have a lot of empathy for your generation, and not pity. I'm not talking about pity, but things for you guys changed very quickly. It wasn't you guys weren't necessarily prepared for a technological like revolution that started ramping up was since the 1960s because my the only constant like my generation has faced is change. We don't know what to do when things don't change. We get impatient when things don't change or improve.
right,
There was always been the latest and greatest, but the time period for the latest and greatest was much longer, 50 years ago.
right,
And society did not move as fast. So we have grown up with the ability to adapt, overcome, and improvise on the technological side because if we weren't literate technologically, we'd fail in school.
right,
You had to learn how to use these things because you wouldn't actually pass your test.
right.
You wouldn't be able to study for your exam. You wouldn't be able to write your papers in college. So it wasn't even a choice for us. We
Mhm.
just like here is your world that you're going to grow up in. Here's the skills you now have to have, because it's almost as if we've replaced, like you've mentioned it before. I don't need to repair my car,
Mhm.
but I do need to know how to type,
Right.
because if I don't know how to use a keyboard and type, I'm going to be at a severe disadvantage. And like that's difficult. So the skills that we have, I think, ultimately are less important
Mhm.
than in your generation, but we do have a different set of skills.
Right. Well, and I think looking at it from a maybe a 10,000-foot view too, and I could be wrong here, but when you think about the difference in generations, like the knowledge that I had going through school, when you had to problem solve, when there was an issue came up, you had to go into your own database, your own skill set, your own experiences, and you had to draw with that.
Mhm.
Okay, you didn't have a little box that you could type something in to get the answer. You had to have that answer within yourself, and it was either a skill or an experience or knowledge that you retained and fixing that problem. And today, think about the fact that if a person didn't have technology or Google or their phone for a month,
Mhm.
how would they live their life and how would they solve the little intricacies and the problems and the challenges they had, you know? And what we're seeing is today is the fact that for me dealing with 18, 19, 20-year olds, one of the problems I have is I assume that you know things that you should know. If, for example, if I tell one of my students to go unlock a door and they have a key ring, I assume they know how to use those keys and unlock a door. But I've had students who, when they put the key in the door, if they don't turn the key upside down, because sometimes you have a key it's upside down and you have to manipulate it. They'll try it one way, and if it doesn't work, then they're lost. So there's that no ability to experience that says, you know what? Sometimes you have to turn the key upside down. Why? Because I've opened up 1,000 million doors, and sometimes the keys are upside down. Sometimes the keys go in this way. Sometimes you got to fuddle with the key a little bit to make the lock. Okay, but I've got people that have used the right key and they can't open the door.
Yeah.
And so that's just just an example.
Yeah, and that's funny is because we have the ability for problem solving when it comes to searching for things, especially online. But we know how to manipulate data to get results that we want. So it's taking the same mentality and applying it to something totally different, the virtual world. Because very rarely would somebody my age try to look for something on Google with one search and not find something. So if I wanted to find out information, you and I are both fans of Michigan
Right.
history. If we wanted to find out something that happened in Michigan, let's say 1947, let me just say that, I would type it in once, and let's say the first three answers didn't return anything I was looking for, and I just gave up. Like, oh well, I guess I didn't find it. We would never do that. My generation would never do that.
Right.
However, I have helped the older generations out, and they've only tried one or two things.
Hmm.
I'm thinking, so I ask, what are you looking for? Why don't we try this? And so for sometimes us millennials look at the older generation and say, why didn't you choose this? And then the response is, well, I didn't know I could do that. And so the roles are completely switched. So
Right.
when we struggle opening a door,
Hmm.
the question is, why didn't you try to do it the other way? And we're like, I didn't know I could do that. You see,
Right.
the parallels are in two totally different worlds. We've learned
Hmm.
two different, you want to talk about values, different skill sets placed with different values, because the currency, there's not trades anymore, which are unfortunately going by the wayside. It is in infrastructure and technology. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I know some people my age who don't own a smartphone, but they know how to use a smartphone.
Right.
You know, but 60 years ago, did everyone I mean, just an example, did everyone know how to change a tire 60 years ago, 70 years ago growing
Yeah, it
up?
was required in driver's
Yeah,
training.
there you go. See, like the thought of somebody not knowing how to do it, that'd be a shock, right?
Right.
Yeah, so there are parallels.
Right.
And
But
but
but the but see the question is that if do we still have flat tires in our physical world?
we do,
We
yes.
do.
Yeah, that
Okay, and so how do you get that tire changed with your cell phone?
yeah, but you call somebody who comes and does
But
it
what if
for you.
that person that comes doesn't know how to do it because they're in the cell phone world?
Mhm.
See, there's always somebody else to do something the old fashioned way.
Right.
But the other thing too is that you just mentioned something about those two parallel worlds is that those three people or those three things that you were looking for and you couldn't find them and you went to that person and you said, "Did you try this?" And they
Mhm.
said, "I didn't know how to
No.
do that." But the person that did, they learned how to do that from somewhere. That was an experience that
Right,
they had.
exactly.
You just not born with it. So, yeah.
Eh,
But I still say that there are basic things that all people should know because with my upbringing, I want to be independent. I would never want to be dependent upon somebody else because, I mean, from the basic needs in life, food, shelter, those are things that are your responsibility. It's not my responsibility to feed, clothe, or shelter somebody else while they're doing something else.
mhm.
It's kind of like society. Okay. If I'm raising your kids, what are you doing?
Right. Yep.
Right. That's what I mean.
Well,
That's the thing.
and I think for those who don't know you, the idea that no one's coming to help you. I'm the only one that can be the source of dependability. I'm gonna have to rely on myself. That came from a more of a rough upbringing, and you mentioned it earlier. For those who don't know, what was life like for you growing up? And I guess which we'll get to that question here in a second. But you kind of have mentioned it was a little difficult. Why was it difficult? What were your circumstances?
Well, I kind of like live the best of both worlds. So I was raised in your typical, I would say, middle class, average home. I had a mom and a dad, and we had, there was three children, and we lived on, a street in the city in a little town, in the United States of America, and life was just great. I um, I went to school, and I came home, and we had, we grilled hamburgers on Sunday, and it just, everything seemed to be good. And then, at that point, my father was a fireman. And so he, back in the day when we had, you know, show and tell, and you talked about what your dad did and all those different things. So my dad was a fireman, and he wore a uniform, and he was considered a hero. And so all the kids were kind of like, "Oh, your dad's a fireman, yeah." And then there were days like when we'd have like fire prevention week, and he would come, and I'd get, he'd come and give me a hug, and all the other kids are like, "Wow, the fireman." And the coolest time is a funny story. The coolest time was when every now and then my dad would, when I was in grade school, and it was lunchtime, he would say, "How about if I bring you McDonald's?"
That's a
Right?
big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal back then. That was huge. So I would go to lunch and I wouldn't have a lunch. And so all the kids are like, "Ha ha, Scott ain't got no lunch. Scott ain't got no lunch. Ha ha ha." And then all of a sudden the doors would open and my dad would come in with his uniform.
Mhm.
A fireman comes in with McDonald's. So it was like a double dose of Superman, right? So he'd come over, and then, it's typical the way school is, then now everybody wants to be your friend. You get the front of the line.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
get to, you're the captain of the kickball team. You go out there on so I had that life, right?
Yeah.
Right up to the point where my dad left. My dad had some infidelity. He decided that he no longer, he had some issues, but it was very abrupt. It was like one day he was there and one day he wasn't. And so we did not have, my parents were divorced, and we did not have your typical divorce family. It was more of an abandonment. And now let me just explain. And there's probably people that would see this and have different memories. But for me growing up, where everything was provided for you, it was just everything was no worries. You just being a kid, and I had a wonderful childhood. Very, very adventurous. I had some woods behind my house where the Indians lived, and I fought the Indians with my BB gun, and just I was like like almost like watching one of these television shows or Dennis the Menace or something. It was just very, very, very adventurous until he left. And when he left, there was no child support, there was no alimony, there was no insurance, there was no visitation, there was no weekend custody battles, nothing. He was gone. And it was never explained to me why. And keeping in mind that Uncle Steve was probably 16 or 17, so he was at the end of his childhood going into adulthood, and my sister was, 3 or 4 years older than me, so and I was the youngest, and I believe I was like 9 years old at that time. And so not understanding, and so when you don't have a father there, you all of a sudden you still try to live your normal life, except for when it comes to the father and son baseball game and the father and son hockey game, and you start it's not making any sense. Dad's not there, and then you start seeing him when he does show up at some sporting events that you have. He's with another woman. It's not your mom, and it's never explained to you. So you start kind of hearing stories, bits and pieces about what's going on, and at some point he's never coming back. And so
Did you have that realization?
yeah,
Uh,
because nobody there was Christmases that went by, there was no contact, there was no birthdays,
Yeah. Well,
no
so you're around 9 when he left. How long did it take you to realize that he was never coming back?
well, I think it was like within a year.
Yeah.
I remember going to school in 6th grade and filling out the paperwork, and you fill out the name and address and what ambulance company you want to come and take you away and everything. And I remember under the father section, I wrote none because I had no idea where my dad lived. I had no phone numbers. Again, we weren't, well, we didn't have a relationship at that point. So,
Do you remember that? Do you remember how you felt when you realized that? Was it? I mean, because from that point on, and I know you'll describe this, it was like you mentioned, no one's going to come and help me. I mean, you had to really pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. So
right.
was it a period of sadness for you, or was it
Yeah, I
just
think I think because the first thing you start seeing is other kids have fathers, and then the economic things really started to hit. The house was starting to fall apart. You didn't have the clothes and the material things that other kids had. You didn't have a new bike. You didn't have things for Christmas. You didn't have interactions in schools. And so there was, that started happening. And then, there's the times when you're in bed and you thinking, it's not that, am I being punished? I never thought that. I always felt sad because, it was like I just didn't have it. And so, but I saw my mom really try to do the best that she could with what she had. And I think when I was saved as a Christian, I think that's when my shift came to the point where I decided that I have to take care of my mom.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
I think this is really going to sound strange, but I remember watching a movie. I don't know what the name of the movie was. And because we have a military background in our family, mom was in the army, my mom was in the army, my dad was in the army, and cousins and everything, and we valued military service. But I remember watching a show, and I don't remember the name of it, but the scene was at a train station, and people were coming home from the war, and there was this woman standing on the platform looking for the people getting off the train, and she was kind of a typical 50s, 60s. She had the little scarf around her head, and she was carrying her purse with her gloves, and she's looking for her son. And of course, her son never got off the train. And I felt so sorry for that lady, because where's her son? And I I just that image in my mind, and so I always felt that I didn't want that to be my mom. I mean, and symbolically, I did not want her to ever be a victim. I did not want her to have a need because I seen what had gone through with her struggling, trying to provide for 3 kids with on a very limited income, with no welfare, no nothing. We didn't have nothing. So, and put that in perspective, and maybe we'll talk about it later. So, in 1978, when she was working at the Open Pantry on Greenwood Avenue in Jackson, and the Abe Southern Fried Chicken, which was next door, blew up that night and caused the Open Pantry to be shut down for 3 weeks. She did not go to work, so therefore we didn't have a paycheck. And it was in April of that year that I went to bed hungry because we didn't have any food. And I never held it against my mom, and my mom was doing the best she could, and she finally at some point realized that we didn't have anything to eat, and she walked over to my Uncle Bill's house and borrowed $20. So here we are in the modern age when you have all of this social network, you have all of this social equality and everything, and all this financial stuff. I know what it's like to live in the United States of America and to be poverty. I
Mhm.
understand that. And so what do I do? Do I say, woe is me? No. There's a voice in me that says, if you want it, you have to get it. And I think that came from my mom. She said, there's nothing I can do. I can't replace your father. So that's basically the day I stopped becoming a kid. And I think your grandma always felt bad about that I never got to finish out being a kid,
Mhm.
that I became an adult at 14, 13, and that's when I got a job, and I have not stopped working since. I got my first job at Andy's Pizza when I was 13, washing dishes, and so I have not never been unemployed since then.
Mhm. And that would have been, 19
That would have been the fall of
70
'77.
77.
So, yep.
So, and you have been doing it ever since. And so, I'm just curious with Grandma, who is no longer with us. She was such an amazing woman. But did you ever have like that conversation, that heart to heart of like, here's our situation. It's bleak. Yes, here are the facts, and I'm sorry. Did you actually ever have that
Oh yeah,
conversation
we
with her?
talked about it a lot, and that's why we developed a friendship, because we were working together. I was buying groceries, she was paying the light bill. We were both saving money and making 12 monthly payments for the fuel oil, and we never felt sorry for ourselves. We laughed about it. I used to say that when mom talked about being poor, and I remember being little, just saying, "Mom, we're not poor." I said, I said, "Poor people," I said, "We're not poor." I said, "We just don't have any money." I said, "Poor people don't have any money or love."
Mm.
And I said, we have a family. And so sometimes at Christmas time, all we had was a Christmas tree, but we had one, and so I think of my childhood, and yeah, I would always, it's like with you, I wanted things better for you, but there's also so many things that I learned, and I missed out. I missed out on sports and missed out on things that I really wanted to do. But I was being trained as an adult just a lot earlier than everybody else. So that's why things like COVID-19 don't affect me, and and storms, and I think that's where my emergency preparedness and security. I don't live in fear, because I was taught at a young age that you have to take care of yourself,
Yeah.
and
If you would have given into fear, that would have been it. I mean, I don't
right,
know what would have ever happened to you and Grandma, at that point.
right,
And and it's funny you mentioned that exact moment of being in school and having a dad who's a firefighter. Well, other people might not be able to relate to that, but I can relate to that because you would go on to graduate high school and you would go on and to start your career in many different schemes. Would you mind describing for those people your career and work? I know it's continued on, but for the majority of your life, you did some very odd things, stuff that I don't understand how you even woke up and did them. I don't understand how somebody could be called, but other than the fact that obviously it's God's calling on your life, you've seen things that most people would never see, and you've lived a life and a career that most people take for granted. So, describe what was your job right out of like once you moved out of the house. Before you met mom, what were you doing, and describe your career up to what you're doing now.
well, I think we have to even go back even a little bit farther than that. So when my dad left, even prior to that, I delivered newspapers and got pocket money and change to buy my bike and buy different things back then. And my sports stuff, I want a new baseball glove, so I had a base. I did delivered newspapers, which today, I mean, that's a whole story in itself. I mean, that's a
Right.
whole marketing franchise to be a paper boy the way we had to do it back then as opposed to do it now. I shoveled snow. I did odd jobs with my uncle painting on Saturdays, and so what I learned was, if you want to call it a woundedness, is that is that nobody's going to give you anything So you have to go earn it. And until this day, perhaps I am a workaholic because that's what I learned as a child, that if you don't work, you don't eat. If you
Mhm.
don't work, you don't have a car. If you don't, so everything you have in life, you have to earn it.
Mhm.
Now, I know that we live in a generation today where there's this entitlement and there's this expectation, and I think that's all convoluted because there's this idea that there's free stuff out there, and we all know that there's nothing is free. Somebody else is paying for it.
Right.
And so when I graduated from high school and I wanted to get money, I didn't decide to go to college until like April or May of my senior year
Mhm.
because my high school was so different too with my building trades. So I didn't have a counselor. I didn't have any counseling or guidance whatsoever from my high school. I had a couple of mentor teachers, but in 1981, the construction market dropped and just fell right out of the economy dropped, so there were no construction jobs. So I figured I'd have to go to college, and I went in the Army, and that didn't work out because they were going to move me from my military police reserve to regular Army. So anyway, I ended up coming back home, and then I worked odd jobs in construction. And I got to finally, just by talking to one of my friends about, I understood what the Pell Grant was and that there was some money, I think $600, so I could go get books and go to JCC. I got into law enforcement. I wanted to make a change because I was looked down upon as a person who was from a lower social economic. I wouldn't say it's discrimination, but I do know that there was preferences that were given to other people based on that. I mean, there were judgments made. Um, so then, I got into law enforcement and I took it very seriously, and God was all behind it. It was all a God thing. I got hired into the Jackson Police Department. I was the first white male hired in the Jackson Police Department in 8 years as a cadet, and I was the junior cadet. There were two other cadets in front of me. Um, when another officer left, and I was promoted because the other two officers in front of me had flunked their classes. The other two cadets, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
So when I actually got hired on our honeymoon,
Mhm.
Mom and I came back
That's
from
right,
our.
because you actually got promoted as a police officer,
Yep,
right?
I
So
got
that would have
promoted to police
been
officer. Yep,
1985, right?
yep,
So you come back
yep,
from your honeymoon, you get a
yep,
promotion.
yep.
That
That was
must
the
be.
best. It was the best wedding present I ever got. So yeah, so
So you're making you made the big leagues. Did you always want to be a police officer?
I wanted to be a police. I mean, I wanted to be a fireman. I think deep down inside because my uncle was a fireman, my dad was a
A
fireman,
fireman.
and so
So
and I tried out
so
for that, and there were 300 people that tested, and they were taking the top 25, and I opened up the mail one day and my number was 26,
yeah. Oh,
and then like 2 months later I got hired in the police department,
yeah.
and I worked at the police department. I was really good. I enjoyed it. I was an investigator. And I was there about 4 years, and then just another God thing happened when they needed firemen, and there was a lateral transfer that you could do. I just happened to stop into a fire station one day to get a cup of coffee, and some people that I'd known that worked there said, "Hey, did you hear about this?" And so again, I was very inquisitive. There was no computer, no phone. I
Yeah.
had to go use some human capital, some social capital, and long story short, I made a lateral transfer to the fire department.
Now, before we go any further, so how long were you a police officer for? You said 4 years.
I was 4 years as a city police
And
officer.
how far? Like, what was your status or title when you left?
I was an officer,
You're an
just a
officer,
patrol
still
officer. Yep,
patrol officer,
yep.
and then so you're talking about a lateral transfer. God moved in your way. So what does a lateral transfer mean?
I meant I kept my city time, my vacation accrual, and my pay, and it just everything transferred over, so I didn't lose employment. And so for retirement purposes, I had 4 years of seniority, so I transferred over to the fire department as a firefighter.
And that would have been 1989.
89.
Okay,
Yep.
and you just started this new adventure about being a firefighter.
Yeah, and
Did you
so
have any idea what you were doing?
not really. So I went to firefighter school. You had to go to firefighter one, firefighter two, and hazmat and everything. So I did all that. And what's really interesting is that in my life I was working 3 to 11. p.m. at the police department. Mom was working 8 to 5, so I had Tuesdays and Wednesdays off and spent those days in court. She had Saturdays and Sundays off. So it was very stressful because we
Mhm.
never saw each other. So then I got this job at the fire department, and we worked the California 3 platoon system.
Yeah. So you're
So,
gonna have to explain it to people.
okay, so it's basically you work a day, 24 hours, then you're off a day, 24 hours, then you work a day, 24 hours, then you're off a day, and then you work a day, and then you're off for 4 days. And so when you look at the calendar, it's so much easier to explain. If you look at the calendar, you work 3 of every 9 days with a day off in between. So after about a month, I was going stir crazy.
Right.
I,
So
you know,
how long did, because that's a big, for people who are like 8 to 5 or 9 to 5.
right,
I mean, the idea that in fire department you're not fighting fires 24/7.
right,
I mean, there's obviously you're on call for 24/7 or 24 hours at a time, 7 days a week. But your shift, like you said, 3 days out of the 9 days. Some of those days, I mean, I asked you this. You didn't necessarily take a call sometimes.
right.
Yeah.
But so we had to maintain all the equipment,
Yeah.
and we had to train, and we did fire inspections, and there was just a lot of busy work because the fire department, when you go to a fire, you have to take everything with you.
You're exactly. Yeah.
Fuel, water, electricity, hydraulics. I mean, so all that equipment has to be trained, maintained, and it's a constant upkeep so that when that bell rings,
Yeah.
that stuff works.
Exactly. So, but that, like, the schedule is that you get a full day off after working, and
Right,
some of those days were strenuous,
right,
obviously. But I mean, of course, all of the days of the fire department
right.
somewhat strenuous. But for those listening who might be upset that I just said that, because I actually later on in life, I actually spent a full day with you guys down there. It was a lot of fun, but for the people working 9 to 5 and get up and do 9 to 5 and 9 to 5, the fire department, that must have been, I mean, that's a huge, were you prepared for that adjustment personally?
Um,
Is that what led
I
to
was really
this?
looking forward to the schedule because you got a lot of time off. Now for those people out there to realize, I was away from my family 56 hours a week
Right.
because that was our normal work week was 56 hours. And so for all those 9 to 5ers out there who had some weekends off, I would just ask how many birthdays and holidays. I worked holidays in police and fire. Closest I ever came to killing a man in my police department was on Christmas Day.
Mhm.
And so I work Christmases away from my family, holidays, other holidays, birthdays. There's a lot that you sacrifice in
Mhm.
that type of job.
Yeah.
So there in the fire service, there's no weekends.
Right.
You just this perpetual calendar keeps going and just
Exactly.
keep going and keeps going.
So
So
how long did you make it before you were going stir crazy, like you mentioned?
about a month
Yeah.
because I mean you work and then all of a sudden you got 4 days off and it's like you clean the garage, you clean the basement, and now what do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's when I got my part-time job, and so I had all this certification as a police officer. So then I got a job part-time as a police officer in Waterloo Township and ended up working out there for the next 18 years. So I did police and fire separately,
Yeah.
not as a public safety, but as
Yeah.
separate.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is that why in the world would you go back? Because I mean, because people nowadays, law enforcement. I'm not even gonna get into the politicals thing. Is it's much more nuanced now, and there's different services that each particular city or municipality rather has with their philosophy with law enforcement and emergency response and fire response. But like you just mentioned, it was firefighting only, police work only. Those were two separate things, but you were able to get out of a pretty dangerous line of work, going into another dangerous line of work. But you, after a month, were like, Why not have both?"
Right.
So why did
Well,
you go
well,
back?
because that's the skill set I had. It's you have to go with what you know, and I was good at it.
Hmm.
And it was fun. It was intriguing. Um, and the issue today, the work schedules for law enforcement is totally different now than it was back when I was. When I was working patrol, I worked like the worst part of the city from 3 p.m. to midnight or 3 p.m. to 11, or sometimes I worked nights, and I had Tuesdays and Wednesdays off. And there was no the next 7 years did not look. I was not going to get anything on. I mean, anything better than that. So
Gotcha.
that meant there was no weekends, there was no, no social stuff, no baseball, no softball, no bowling, no all that stuff was all, your social life is different then. Now you're seeing that that's changed because people they want to live a life, right?
Right.
And so you're seeing officers working 10-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts, and they get more day, more time off. And so having working the fire department, um, was 56 hours and then being able to work 8-hour shifts. It was, different. It's a different job
So
back
that's what you
then.
did. So
So
on your days off, you worked part time at Waterloo Township as a
police officer. Yep.
police officer. And so what? So your schedule then, like, what did that do to your days off then?
I
You,
still had a lot of days off because I only worked 6 days part time.
and
So
then
I'm
at the
still able to work two jobs and have more time off than the 9 to 5ers.
and so and you say 6 days a month as at Waterloo Township
Yes.
and 9 days a month working as a firefighter.
Right.
So that that's obviously it's still coming out. 15 days a
Yeah.
month. That's not bad.
Right.
But that wasn't the only part-time job that you decided to get into.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
then,
So how long did you do that before you picked up the ME's office?
well, that would have been, I went to the medical examiner's office in 96.
Yeah. So
So,
you've already had a kid. Now you have a
yeah.
dog at this point.
Yeah.
You've been married to mom.
Mhm.
So life isn't busy enough for you. You decided why'd you pick up a third part,
That's
like a
there's a
third job?
real simple answer to that, and there's a real simple reason for that. I was asked if I wanted to do it. And when you grow up poor, when somebody offers you a job, not only is it flattering, okay, because of my skill set, police, fire, investigations, some medical background, there's of all the people that you could pick, why did they pick me? That was the first job that I never applied for.
Yeah.
So they came and offered to me and I said yes instantly. And it turned out I had some wonderful training and got, some interesting cases and really helps you put life into perspective when you're dealing with that type of nature of work because you get to see what's behind the scenes. You get to see what reality is, not nothing that's hyped up by the media or doctored by some television documentary. You get to see the real deal, even sometimes before the investigators get there. So untouched.
Yeah. So and describe. So you have the firefighting. You have the part time at the police or Waterloo Township as a police officer, and now you pick up part time at the medical examiner's office
Right.
as a death investigator. So describe that in detail. What was your job at the medical examiner's office?
So as the medical examiner, I was what was called the official title was a medical legal death investigator. So the way the system works in the state of Michigan is we have a medical examiner system for each county, and then it's the responsibility of the medical examiner to determine the cause and manner of every death. And there are several ways they do that. They can get there's only like 4 or 5 ways you can die. So there's natural death, there's suicide, which is taking your own life, homicide, which means somebody else takes another life. So there's natural, suicide, homicide. There is accidental, and then there's other. There's five. There's only 5 ways you can die,
Mhm.
and so you have to determine the cause and the manner. So you could die of blunt trauma from a car accident, or you could die of blunt trauma from an inflicted wound from somebody else, which would come up to be a homicide.
Mhm.
So, so you had to determine that. And so what we would do is go to the scene when we have a death scene. We collect all the information. We do history, to lead up to help determine what that cause and manner was. And that might be just their medical history. He said, Charlie died. He's 96. He's had 700 heart attacks. Pretty good chance he had another heart attack.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
especially when you look at he doesn't have any wounds or something like that. So the guy's got 9 bullet holes in him. We pretty much know he didn't commit suicide unless he was a poor shot. So it was just one of those.
Oh, God.
So it was
That-
just one of those things where.
For the record, that's the sense of humor you have to have if you work all those jobs.
So that was that was what you did.
Now, what that I remember the firefighting because that was the most prominent thing, but I still remember that chirp of your pager like the back of my hand because when it was your day off, we're playing, and I hear that pager go off, I knew it was for, and you'd have me run up inside your pants, pocket inside your closet, and I'd get it, and I'd read the number. I think that was one of
Mhm.
the first things I ever did is that you taught me how to read the number,
Mhm.
on the pager so you could call Jill Glare,
Yep.
and you could get the information necessary, and then it would be decided whether or not you needed to go once you contacted the people. And some
Right.
days that would require you leaving. Some days that's something you can handle over the phone. And for me, I was always praying that you didn't have to go. And I
Right.
remember sometimes that you had to leave some sporting events for it, or a couple times I went with you, and it
Yep.
was kind of weird to watch. But you never shied away from that reality with me. You never, obviously not as a young kid, but you would go to or the Kodak store here in town. It was when that was still a thing, and you talk to Kyle, and he would have those photos developed. And as a kid, I growing up, I'm always curious, and then you always kept them away for a time, and then as I got older, you started showing me that reality
Mhm.
of here's what happens when you trip and fall down the stairs, or when someone's mad and they decide to shoot somebody in the head. What does it actually look like? And you were constantly telling me and trying to teach me the difference between reality and fantasy, which is like the movies, because you know
Mhm.
how much I love movies and TV shows.
Right.
And that is something that most kids never got as far as an education. So I feel blessed because I've seen that reality, very little, obviously. But if you're talking about life skills, you
Mhm.
talked about it earlier. That's something I wish every kid growing up to a certain point, because they need therapy if they got it too young,
Mhm.
that they need to be shown the consequences of these actions when you text and drive or you run a red light. What happens to a human body when it gets hit by X amount of weight going
Mhm.
55 miles an hour because you wanted to switch the song on your phone
Mhm.
and you weren't paying attention? So that's something that, for whatever drove you, if it was the Holy Spirit or it was just common sense, I guess, you taught me that from a young age. So what are what are the things, with your X amount of years, your 25 plus years of experience as a firefighter, 18 and 19 years as a police officer, death investigator? What are like the common misconceptions about like these things about sickness, death, disease, trauma, that people think they know because they like watching Law and Order versus what actually happens? Like, what are the biggest misconceptions or things that you have to educate people about?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head because I think most people get their education from television. Um, and you see that what happening in our society today with law enforcement. They want or saw their crimes solved within an hour with a couple commercials in between. And, so their perception of, even when they see things on the news, what reality is. And so real life, I think one of the best things that happen for us is some of this live TV and videos. You ever watch a video, like a YouTube video where something happens and it's because it's unscripted, and I could be way out in left field by saying this, but it just looks so
Fake?
it looks so unprofessional.
Yeah,
It looks like
it's
the person getting the person that you're looking at, they look like a almost like a uncoordinated um
right.
unprofessional
Yeah,
because Hollywood, like Jack Reacher, everything's coordinated,
yeah.
right?
It's very clean.
And it's clean
Everybody knows how to do
and
everything.
it's all fake,
Right,
right?
of
Well, in
course.
reality, you don't get to train and you don't know what's happening, and so you're just kind of reacting, and so that's why it's just like chaos. But that's the real world,
Yeah, it's
you
it's a
know.
messy thing,
Yeah,
right?
look at a YouTube video of a tornado that goes through Oklahoma, and then compare that to the movie Twister.
Yeah.
Okay, so all that CGI and all that stuff, it's just not real. So I think people need to understand that reality is reality, and no matter what kind of spin that we want to try to put on it, it's still reality.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we try to protect people from reality. I mean, think of other countries that are dealing with wars and terrorism and stuff like that. Their children are used to seeing people blowing up in the streets and people getting shot and stuff like that. I mean, that's just the way some cultures are.
Unfortunately, yeah, some
Yeah,
people grow up with
and
that
so
war.
think about you know, the trauma that they had to go through. But then again, if you go back in history and look at the Civil War and look at some of um, the disease processes that happened, in the pioneer days,
Yeah.
how people would get, disease and
It
stuff.
was a it was a much harder life.
Yeah, and
There
so,
you couldn't shy away from. You didn't have the
right.
luxury
Yeah.
of not
Yeah.
experiencing it.
Today, if some people will see the birth of a kitten and they'll go, "Oh, so gross," and you have other people say, "Well, I was born on a farm and raised on a farm, and I've seen
Exactly.
all that
Yeah.
stuff." Really, that's what we got to compare to,
Yeah.
So,
And,
um,
so you deal with these things, and it's not like, yeah. I think for people who my generation, we have the luxury of not having to experience these things. Um, Maybe combined with what we talked about earlier, intellectual curiosity or the lack thereof. When you see something, you don't know how to respond to it. And I think that's a value you try to instill within me. I might not have all of the skills that you have. I know I certainly don't. However, that's something that you've tried to train me is always prepare me for, hey, what are you prepared to do if this happens? And it started very young. Like even back when we listened to C.W. McCall on your white or 1996 Ford Rangers cassette tapes, and you would ask me, Michael, what road are we on? And I would say, I don't know. And you started teaching me about roads, directions. You started teaching me about mile markers on highways. Even when I was just a little kid, just 4 or 5 years old, you just asked me these simple questions just to keep me interested. So I wasn't just falling asleep all the time or you know getting lost. You were always trying to teach me something in a moment, and one of those things hit nail on its head when I was getting ready to start driver's training, and you taught me some just basic directional skills, but it was always to a point of one day you're going to drive yourself to school and I'm not going to be there. What happens when you are in trouble? And I call you, and you said this. I remember this. You said, "All right, Michael, you call me. You call your dad and you say, 'Dad, I need help. What's my next question, Michael?' You asked me that." And I said, uh, you'd probably ask me where I was. And you'd say, "Now, if you can't tell me where you are, how am I supposed to help you? How is 911 supposed to help you?" And I'll never forget that because it's like, how would I describe? I need help, and I'm somewhere,
Mhm.
but I don't know what direction I'm going. I don't know what road I'm on. I don't know what mile marker. I don't know what exit maybe on the highway I'm coming up to. I don't know how to describe my problem. So that from a young age, it was just situational awareness, which we'll get to later. But you try to teach me that even if I don't have the answer, I can call you because one thing you did well is that as a kid, you may not have had that dependability, but I always did. I knew that if I ever had an issue, you would always be there. And God help the person who stood in your way.
Mhm.
you
Well,
know?
but that's what a father's supposed to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's my job. So I really appreciate the compliment, but like I've always said,
You don't get credit for
for
doing what you're supposed to do.
exactly. That's yeah, yeah, that's right.
um,
You don't get extra bonus
uh,
points for doing what you're
yeah.
supposed to do.
So you continue with your career and you retire from the fire department, and it leads you into a totally different line of work, different schedule. I'm in college now. Describe your transition out of being a medical examiner, firefighter, police officer, back into maybe the civilian world to a point, and working at Lynn Products.
Well, so prior to me retiring, another significant event that we should probably discuss was going to Hurricane Katrina.
Oh yes, that's right.
And so that really got me into the emergency preparedness. I really, up to that point, didn't know what emergency preparedness was from a concept standpoint. It was more about response. And so that whole time down there, I was really intrigued by emergency preparedness, emergency management. And so I came back and really self educated myself by, again, sacrificing my time and effort and taking advantage of the education that was provided at Michigan State Police Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. And I got my professional emergency management certification, went through some 45 or 50 classes through FEMA, a 3-year program at MSP, and then decided that businesses were not prepared. And it's almost like it's almost prophetic when you look at what we just dealt with COVID-19. 15 years ago, that's what we were talking about. What are you prepared to do, not only just for a flood or a fire or a hurricane? And we found out in Hurricane Katrina that people were not able to take care of themselves because we had this idea that the government was going to come in and provide all of our needs, and we realized the government couldn't do that. So there was a first standard idea that you as an individual need to be able to take care of yourself for the golden 72 hours
Hmm.
because they can't assemble everybody together and
That quickly, yeah.
yeah, and because we just don't have that many people and that many resources standing around. So there again, it just kind of fed into my whole life a motto of being prepared, being self-dependent. So with that in mind, so when I retired, I got a job doing safety at Lynn Products, and it was occupational safety. And occupational safety, a lot of it is proactive. We want to prevent an injury from happening. So it was guarding, it was making sure people had the right protective gear, they were following the right procedures. Okay, it wasn't responding to injuries. It was all about prevention and it was all about proactive.
Yeah, because once you try to react, it's too late, right?
Right, yeah. I'd much rather prevent you getting sawed in half on this big machine than to put the two pieces back together and explain to somebody why that happened.
Right.
So cause and effect. So injury prevention was really something that you worked on, and then that led to like site security. But something significantly happened in our country at that time, and that was the whole terrorism and counterterrorism that started and domestic terrorism, and we had ISIS and Al Qaeda, and so that would have been like around 2010, 2011, and so there's where I made the big switch into more of security and started securing our workplaces because we had workplace violence was now becoming an issue, and our churches were being targeted. You had racial issues going on. You had ideology. You had all kinds of things, and so the violence was really, really ramping up. And a lot of it just came from the whole terrorist idea as opposed to conventional warfare.
Hmm.
There was bioterrorism, there was nuclear terrorism, there was, you know, um, all kinds of different, neo-terrorist types ideas that people were putting together.
And you, in conjunction with learning these things, making a career move, having experiences again that I think God certainly had His hand in. You were learning things that a lot of people didn't have, and you combine that with your faith and what you were doing already by just going to church. You along the way had this idea to use the skills, the talents, the gifts that you believe God gave you, and apply them potentially to the church. So, what describe then as you have gone on with your career, you've moved on to new schemes. You at the same time were looking at the church and how do we make the church safer? And so instead of which a lot of people would do, once you see something bad has happened, and I'm talking anywhere in life, not just the church, you call somebody, right? Because there are professionals for a reason. Not everyone's going to be trained how to respond to a crisis. But once something bad has happened, you then call somebody. But the question is are there anything? Excuse me, is there anything that we can do to prevent some of these bad things that can happen? You can't prevent medical emergencies if somebody has trouble breathing. You can't help out somebody who's diabetic who didn't take their insulin. You can't, if somebody who's having a manic episode. You can prepare for those and how to
Right.
respond, but you can't predict them. However, threats of violence, body language, having some background, having people on social media track certain things
Mhm.
helps in prevention. And so, if you can do something to prevent a potential conflict, wouldn't you want to do that? That'd be like a pitch to a business, right? Like if you had control, it's say, would you want to help prevent this from happening? I think
Mhm.
everybody would say yes, but yet no one ever wanted to invest in it. So, how did you take this growing need, combine it with your education and your passions, and basically make that a ministry? How did that happen?
Well, I think it was just a calling that I've always had a servant's heart, and I've always wanted to help people, and I think I had this prophetic way of saying this is a need that's coming, and it was always like 2 or 3 years before people were willing to accept it, um, and I think it was that concept, the fact that if we could prevent it, would we?
Yeah.
Because our country, we learn the hard way. Um, the United States of America has a great response system. We have great lights and siren. If we have an incident, you look on the television set and all you see is police cars and fire trucks for as far as the eye can see. And that's great. But let me ask you this question, is that when we have an incident, in our businesses, our church or something, and we say, if we could have prevented that, would we do it?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, if we know that, let's prevent it from happening. And people would say, well, um, would we change the way we do things? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is if we're doing things A B A B A B and something happens, are we going to change to C D C D?
Mhm.
And they would probably say yes. Well, then why do we have to wait for that event to happen?
Exactly. That's the
And
thing. Yeah.
so it's kind of like there's an old saying from the art of war. The body can't go where the mind hasn't been.
Mhm.
And so my mind has gone to a lot of places. And so when I think if my mind can go there, other people's minds can go there. Do you remember what we did when we first got? This is going to be strange for our listeners. Do you remember when we first got our computer when we lived on Hibbert Street, our very first computer?
Oh, yeah.
And we had the
I
19
I almost I almost would admit this something that's going on the internet, Dad. Yes, go ahead.
so
We
we
had
had
we
a
had
1998 flight simulator from Microsoft.
yeah,
Remember that?
yeah.
1998. And what were we doing in the evenings for fun?
No, no. Listen, this is not on purpose. For the record, for anyone who ends up listening to this, we were not doing this because we were terrorists. We were experimenting with the game's program and we're curious what would happen if
We were flying planes into buildings.
we
Because when we flew the plane into the building, we were looking at the graphics and the it was funny because, and this is true.
there's
So
nothing funny about it for the
no, the
record.
plane would crash, and then when it hit the ground, it would reboot itself
Yeah, it
and
would
take off.
yeah.
And it's like, and we had no. Of course, this is different thinking. Nobody would ever deliberately fly a plane into a building, and
Right.
that's not why we're doing it. But that was what was so, again, maybe prophetic, that if we can think about it,
Yeah.
then somebody else must have been thinking
Exactly.
about it.
And yes,
So
for the record, we were just testing the physics engine of this Windows XP Flight Simulator 1998 for
right,
the record.
yes,
Now, and it worked. So, yes. But so you start this ministry at our former church, and we're in different locations now. But you start a ministry of safety and security,
right.
and for Jackson S Church, and you've done that now, and for what 15 years,
Mhm.
and
And I think what's significant for the listeners is that the program that we used was unique. Nobody in the United States was using what we were doing because I invented it. I brought it because it came from an Israeli base of situational awareness from Michael Rosen, who was the education and training I got. It's a concept of basically looking at suspicious behavior. We know that when bad people are going to do bad things, that their body language changes, that we can prevent things from happening because you just don't wake up in the morning and decide whether you're going to have a bowl of Cheerios or grab a rifle and go shoot people.
right,
Okay, so we know that, and so that's the preventative part. So there are a lot of things, a lot of skill sets that you can teach professionals, law enforcement, security, intelligence gathering. You can also teach this to the average person, not at the same level, but you can do it to where it's very, very effective. And at our church, it was highly effective, and it was so intriguing because people were wanting to learn how to do that. Every church that we've ever went to and trained, nobody's ever turned that training away. They all wanted it. And so instead of waiting for something to happen in your church, we realized that we could prevent things from
yeah,
happening. So that was the key thing. And it went right along with what the mission of our church is. The whole concept of being friendly and paying attention to people that come to your church so that you could fit them into whatever they're looking for. And the whole purpose was asking that proverbial question, why are you here?
Mhm.
What's your purpose
What
here?
is your purpose here at
And
church?
so once we found out what your purpose was, then we could get you connected. And one of those purposes may be if you're trying to do harm
Mhm.
or looking to do harm or practicing for the opportunity to do harm, it's all going to come out in your behavior.
Yeah.
So,
And that's something that we found that when you ask, I mean, a lot of pastors will listen to this. So I have a couple more questions about this before we go. But a lot of people in ministry will listen to this podcast, and my question for them is, why do your people come to church? And how we answered that is a standard kind of American church here in the West. People come to at least came to our former church to socialize. That means drink like take advantage of the free coffee, get maybe something from the coffee bar,
mhm.
to potentially just see their friends and hang out with their friends. People came to listen to the nice music. People came for the free Wi-Fi, and then a few people came to actually worship.
And
And
volunteer, and
volunteer.
yeah,
And there's a lot of reasons why people would come to a church. And of course, our church was anywhere between 12 to 1,600 people on a good given Sunday for most of the years we were there. And I guess when I say we here for the people listening, I served on the safety team with you, and and I this idea of being like preventing things from happening. You had mentioned it doesn't mean that you're a bodyguard with glasses standing in a corner with your arms crossed and you're looking all stern and serious. No, we were actively engaged with people, but for for the church, which have been places of abuse. Not even talking about people who are on the outside. It's been a place of abuse by people from the inside.
right.
Taking advantage of their position to influence those. And they have been targeted attacks. So for those people listening, those pastors, those people in ministry, what are some things that people can do right this very moment on this Sunday, coming up, or their next service, that they can do to help prevent maybe some things that could potentially happen? We're not talking about an active shooter. We're not talking about the stuff out of Hollywood. We're not talking about the anomalies that happen.
Mhm.
We're talking about just the general like things that maybe just a domestic dispute.
Right.
Like this just guy, he's tired of having the kids go with mom, so he's there to grab the kids on Sunday.
Right. Churches are really an easy venue to protect
Mhm.
because there are concentrated reasons why you come to that church. I think it's a very comprehensive answer because just because it's church doesn't mean that it's safe. Just because
Yes.
it's church doesn't mean that we can let our guard down. Just because it's church um, doesn't mean that you don't have to worry about things. Not that, I mean, it's not like worry is a sin. I mean, 35, 40 years ago, people would say that, bad things happen, but they never happen in church
Church.
because it goes back to the fact that at the end of the day, it's a good versus evil. Okay. And if your church is thriving, your church is doing great ministry, your church is meeting people and meeting needs, that is where Satan is going to put his efforts. He doesn't want good things to happen in your church.
No,
Okay?
you're right.
And so he's going to do the littlest, simplest things. That could be discourse on the church board. That could be rumors. That could be, people sneaking in. So you have to be vigilant and you have to understand that,
Vigilant. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
that you have to pay attention to what's going on. And don't say that that'll never happen here or that can't happen here. You have to constantly look out for things. And a good example is you could get a good church and be very naive about why a person is at your church. Why would a person bring puppies to your church? Why would a person bring a puppy to show the children at a church? Nobody's going to get upset with a person who's bringing a puppy to church. Everybody loves puppies. But the question is, why do you bring a puppy to church? I know that a lot of pedophiles and a lot of sexual abusers have used puppies to lure children away because it works
Hmm.
and it's real subtle. And so, weird things like that, if nobody's paying attention and nobody's questioning, for parents, parents have an obligation to take care of their children. If there's something that doesn't feel right or doesn't seem right, then you always put your children's needs and your children's safety and security first and stop worrying about hurting somebody's feelings. because that's what happens with our society. We are so afraid of offending people that we will put our children second or third down the line. And so I've seen that so many times. And so if something is inappropriate, that parent needs to tell somebody, I appreciate that if, not touching my child that way or not taking my child over and that, I don't feel comfortable with you doing that. That's inappropriate. And so there's nothing wrong with doing that, because our children want our parents to look out for us and defend us. And because the children can't do it on their
Yeah, it's
own.
the most
Right.
vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so, like, as far as just things that people can do today, is it just asking, or maybe stop saying the phrase, "That'll never happen here"?
Right.
Yeah, because it's been proven over and over again, the sinfulness of man, it knows no bounds,
Right.
and no one's immune from the effects and the depravity of man, right?
Right.
And so having just the mentality of, no, we don't need to implement this, or no, we don't need to talk about it because it'll never happen here. That is something Satan will absolutely use. That
Right.
type of mentality.
And I think the question I would have to the church and to the pastors is that how many, because I think years ago it was more of an issue than it probably is today. How many people in your church are uncomfortable talking to strangers that come to church? When I say a first timer stranger,
Mhm.
not a strange stranger.
Yeah.
So when a new person comes to your church, how are they approached? How are they greeted? You just shake their hand, say hello, how are you, welcome, and then you turn away and there's a new person that comes to our church and nobody's ever talked to them. We don't know anything about them. I mean, could a person actually come to your church and um, be a part of the service and be greeted and be smiled at and everybody, be friendly and warm. And then that person leave the church. And then if I was to go back in and say, what was that person's name? Where do they live? Where are they from? Did anybody even take the time to be friendly and get to know them? Because that's, if you're looking to do harm, you don't want people coming up and talking to you.
Exactly.
You don't you want to kind of blend into the corner in
Yep.
the
Blend in
back
the
row,
background.
and
Yep.
and so yeah, that's so I think because years ago there were churches where, oh, there's a new person here, uh-oh,
Yeah.
you know
It's a source of gossip, and yeah, that person is never greeted at
yeah,
all.
yep,
It's weird when people come to church.
yeah,
I
yeah,
understand that because
yeah,
we've seen that.
yep.
And and but
So
but that's potentially what you're getting at, is that when you're just, it has nothing to do with ill motive. You're
right,
just wanting to, be the friend, be the neighbor, loving thy neighbor,
right,
and in the process of talking to somebody, if you're paying attention, if you
mhm,
are trained, or if you're just looking at how someone's behaving, you might be able to detect if they are there for an ill motive. They will, right?
right. And the thing is that if you have your church and you have a new visitor, you're basically going to ask. You could have 50 visitors a year and you would go through the same process with that visitor. So, for example, if you were coming to my church
Mhm.
and I didn't know you, okay, and with the back of my mind is I want to know what your purpose here is, not only from a security standpoint, but from an interaction. Okay,
Mhm.
so some of the questions I have in my mind would be, why are you here? Are you? I'm in town and I'm just looking for a church to go to. Oh, okay, that's cool. What kind of church have you been to church before? What kind of music do you usually listen to? What do you really, what do you look for in a church, or what's your expectation? Are you maybe like you want to get into a Bible study, or are you more of a contemporary music? So you can start asking questions, and they say, "Well, I got 35 kids, and I just didn't know what kind of
Right.
children's ministry you have." Okay, that's good. So you're starting to learn about this person and learn about what they're looking for, what their purpose is, and then you can connect with them.
Mhm.
Maybe that person walks in the door and says, "This is the first time I've ever been in church before." Oh, good, thanks. Have a nice day.
Yeah,
you
right.
know, it's like, don't sit in my chair. So it's like, "Ah, ta, 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 that's my chair."
Yeah,
So, and then there's no engagement.
yeah.
So that person goes
Yeah,
away.
that's not
Right.
disciple making, because your ministry, and it was incredibly unique, is it's not it was in combination to what Jax Naz here did with her first touch ministry. It was in combination where you the motive was, we just want to get to know people. I know it's a shocker, but while we're doing so, you can prepare people to do a little bit of recon on people, not
Mhm.
not so that you can gossip or be nosy, but because you can help protect potentially against a threat
Right.
or against those, especially again, I'll mention the children. The amount of stories that are continuing to come out with child
Right.
trafficking in this
Mhm.
last 2 years is astonishing, and we know with again the Southern Baptist scandal that occurred. What was that in
Mhm.
2017?
Yeah. I think it's earlier than that.
Earlier than that, that it's they all look like us. It's just normal people, and it's also sometimes people in the church. So what type of policies, what type of programs would you want to institute? Not let's forget the people outside coming in. What about for the staff, policies for children
Well,
and rooms and stuff?
there's those are pretty well standardized. I mean, there's ideas of like um, there's so much training. I mean, of who can be with children. I mean, your background checks. You have to have more than one adult. There's a lot of that stuff that's standard, and that's the easy part. The hard part is keeping it current. You just don't do it once and then go 10 years.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So, and then it's a constant revolving type thing. And then not skipping your corners, not saying, well, that's Joe's cousin and we know Joe really good. So therefore
Exactly.
he
Yeah.
gets in by osmosis or something like
Hmm.
that. But it's interesting, just to back up real quick, when we think about what we were talking about, like visitors, and I'm sure somebody's written a book or done something on this line, but it seems like what would it be like if, Jesus visited your church? Or what would you say if Jesus came to your church in the guise of a homeless person or just a visitor? Because I think there's been some videos that have been done where a pastor dressed up as a homeless person of his own church, disguised and came in and seen how he was treated and some other actors. Remember we talked about our red teams that we did?
Hmm.
It's kind of like that same idea.
The
So
people don't know what red team
yeah.
is. What,
So
what is a
so a
red
red
team?
a red team is where you have a professional actor, kind of like the secret shopper or a secret Santa, where they go in and either try to um, get into a space or get someplace they're not supposed to go, and they're basically testing your protocols, testing your security by violating the physical space. Maybe you have somebody's in trying to pick up a child they shouldn't be picking up a child. Maybe you have this person pretending to be a part of the staff and they're really not. So they're role playing. It's just and without the knowledge of the safety team. So this is a complete stranger to the safety team, but it's coordinated by either the director, and so they're just doing a kind of like a dry run. Very popular. It's a actual profession that they use in Israel, and that's how they train. It's real, real live, actual people trying to do things. And so what's happened at our church was, first of all, were they noticed, and was their behavior noticed, and what did we do about that behavior? So we did interact with these people. We started asking them some questions, very friendly, and we found out that okay, something doesn't seem right. Questions don't answer. The answers don't seem to make sense, or they're giving us two different answers. And then finally, 'cause some of the kids we used were from the college, they were getting so nervous that they just kind of like threw up their hands and said, "Okay, I'm on a red team. I give up," type thing.
Hmm.
Ollie ollie oxen free type thing. So,
Right. So there's a lot of things that people can do. It's just if you're a small town church or everyone knows everyone, that temptation, yeah, is there to cut corners or grant leniency. But the one thing that you said is that Satan doesn't take a day off. Satan and hit the evil that's in this world has no limits. And if the people, this army of God as the church, if we underestimate or we fail to I think practice due diligence, who are the most vulnerable? And
for the
yeah,
children, yeah.
yeah, and exactly. So I
And
think the question is, are we willing to do a little bit more, just a little bit more, in order to take the necessary steps to protect our children? Because your question earlier is fantastic. That if you've asked me this so many times, and you've asked so many other people this, that if we what we know now we knew then, what would we do anything different?
right,
And if
and
the
the
answer is yes,
yes.
Why would we wait?
And so, and then just right parallel with that, we know that, from our sources, from my sources at the people who do great background checks, 80% of churches don't do background checks.
Hmm.
So if your church does not do a background check and a child is harmed as a result of you not doing a background check, the question is, will you start doing background checks? And then the answer probably to that is, I would hope would be yes. So then the question is, who and how many are you going to sacrifice to get there?
Yeah.
That is always that's always a question. And that's the difference between being proactive, reactive, and that's the difference between risk management and crisis leadership. Okay, crisis leadership is all about putting things in place to prevent things. Risk management is accepting the fact it's going to happen. Okay, and we can't prevent it, or we don't want to prevent it, or we can't prevent it, or we don't know how to prevent it, and we'll just deal with it when it happens. And so, there's that, and a lot of things that we've learned are from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's been my whole policy in life. I used to see kids when I was in school that got caught stealing stuff at the candy store, and I saw them got in trouble. So that, hey, I'm not going to get in trouble because I'm not stealing candy,
Right.
Because they always get caught, right?
Yeah,
So
every single time.
Yep.
Well, Dad, this has been great for me. This has been a joy, and I was always able to learn something from you. And I'm gonna have to have you back on because there's a lot more stories you have to tell, and there's a lot of other questions I didn't have the time to get to tonight. But thank you so much for stopping on by. I know you're gonna be a fan favorite, and we'll just have to have you back on in order to whet that appetite some more. But until then, Dad, thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you being on and having this opportunity and the platform. And if there's any churches out there that are looking for guidance on a safety or security mission, ministry, give me a call, get with me. It's my passion, and I can guarantee you that with whatever you have in your church, and that's the key thing, is that we're not looking to bring resources in that you don't have and spend money that you don't have. We can just take your thinking and move it about 3 degrees from one side to the other, just kind of get it off, so you look at things a little bit differently. It's amazing what you can do with what you have.
Yeah.
Where you're at.
Using existing resources.
Existing
And
resources.
if people do want to contact you, how do they do
You
that?
can call me on my cell phone number.
Okay, for people who don't know you, how do they get in contact with you?
So
Dad?
they call me Scott Krebill. They can call me at my cell phone number is 474-4901, area code 517. You can go to my website at KrebillSecurityConsultants.com. There's a website that's got contact information. You can email me at scott.krebill@gmail.com. I'll look at and see that. So a lot of different ways.
All right.
If you own a plane, fly it over my house with a little streaky thing and
a little banner.
Yeah, a banner.
Awesome.
So
Well, thanks, Dad. I appreciate you. I love you, Dad. And
I love you too, and I'm very proud of what you've done, and I'm very proud of your following what God's called you to do.
well, I don't get any credit for doing what I'm supposed to do, but thank you anyway. All right, have a good night. Thank you so much to Scott Krebill, or Dad. What an amazing conversation that was. There was a lot of stuff off mic that we didn't get to, but you guys wouldn't want to hear that anyway because it would just have been an incoherent mess of laughter and fumbling and mumbling over sentences. But I hope you got a sense of why my father does what he does, and maybe you could get a glimpse of that particular ministry, that sacrifice that he has given for the last 15 years. And in fact, we just honored him at my former home church, Jackson Nash Church here in Jackson, Michigan. He just got the Distinguished Service Award from the entire Nazarene Church. NMI is the one who gave him that award, and it's much deserved. So, Dad, thank you so much. I love you, and I pray that people can continue to learn from you and your passion in the church. Thank you for those who have listened. Appreciate your listenership. Please subscribe and like this wherever you listen to podcasts. And I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day wherever you are And whenever you are listening to this, you guys make it worth it. Thank you so much, and may God bless you and keep you.